Hello and thank you for watching. It is all over the news right now, the cancellation of the Keystone XL Pipeline expansion. And if all you read were the headlines, you might come to think that the sky was falling in Calgary. Well, before we go and lose sleep over Keystone XL, we're going to share a few economic fundamentals that matter for Calgary real estate consumers. And we're also going to take a look at what the cancellation of the pipeline actually means for our industry. Are you ready to dive into this? All right, well, let's get going. Okay, so the United States of America has a brand new president, and one of the first things that President Biden did when he got into office was issue an executive order canceling the Keystone XL pipeline expansion. Thanks very much, neighbor. We're off to a great start. But it's not as though the Keystone XL pipeline expansion hasn't faced political uncertainty before. In fact, President Obama canceled the pipeline in 2015, and then President Trump brought it back into play during his tenure. And it's largely because of that the cancellation by Biden was no surprise, because Biden was campaigning on canceling it right from the get-go. So it's not as though we didn't see this coming in Alberta. It's still unfortunate, it's still not the right decision, but it's not as though it is a total surprise. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with oil and gas and you're not familiar with pipelines, it's important to note that the Keystone XL pipeline was an expansion of an existing line. So it's not as though the cancellation of it is taking away any oil that is moving through any pipelines right now. So in that context, it's not going to have an adverse effect on the Alberta and Calgary real estate markets as they sit right now. Mostly because it's not as though it's a surprise, and so the future use of the oil moving through the pipeline wasn't exactly priced into the Alberta economy. Now, we did expect to see it. Kenny has been making lots of political gesturing here about being unhappy that the pipeline expansion has been canceled, but to those in the inside in the oil and gas industry, it is not a huge surprise. Okay, so what does it mean for Calgary real estate prices? Well, it's not great news. The press has not been kind to this particular event, and I think most Calgarians would have loved for the Keystone XL pipeline expansion to have proceeded and carry through with the construction after being brought back into play by President Trump. Well, it didn't happen. Calgarians are having to deal with it. But you know what? We are used to getting bad news here in Calgary, and we are street tough now, and we are able to handle sways in the geopolitical environment, and our pricing has largely not been as affected by this as people would have come to expect. If you go back 10 years, we have had to deal with floods. We've had to deal with forest fires. We've had to deal with OPEC price wars that have completely turned our local and provincial economy up on their heads. We've had to deal with new governments at the provincial and federal level that are nowhere near as supportive of the energy industry as previous governments have been. Fast forward till now, till 2020, and you know what? We also have had to deal with a global pandemic. So hearing the news of Keystone XL being canceled for the second time is certainly a blow, but it's not something that I feel is likely to show up in terms of adverse pricing effects on Calgary real estate. What does matter for Calgary real estate is population growth. What does matter for Calgary real estate is affordability. And those are some of the stats that I want to take a close look at, because I think if you pay attention to those, which seldom make the headlines, you'll feel a lot better about our market and the outlook for it heading into 2021. So let's take a quick look at what the Canadian Real Estate Association is forecasting for Calgary prices for this year. First up, we have a graph here for sales. So this is the total sales, the number of units being sold across Canada, and also broken down by the key markets within Canada. And you can see here the Canadian Real Estate Association is forecasting a much better year for Calgary and Alberta in 2021, with over 17% more sales expected in 2021 than we had in 2020. So when CREA goes and puts together an analysis like this, their statistician and their economists are looking over an array of factors. And of course, something like the Keystone XL pipeline expansion would have to have been factored in to their thought-making and decision-making process before publishing numbers like this. So will the cancellation of the pipeline perhaps result in fewer sales sales? Yes. Will it result in 17% fewer sales? I don't think so. It just doesn't affect that many consumers in Alberta. And so I still feel we're going to have a more active year from a sales perspective than we had back in 2020 prior to the cancellation of the pipeline. Now, the next chart that we have here speaks to pricing. And this is the Canadian Real Estate Association forecasting price changes throughout Canada. And you can see here, by and large, the Canadian economy, the Canadian housing sector has done very well recently. Calgary and Alberta have not been participating in the party to the same extent that other cities have, but this particular year, the Canadian Real Estate Association is giving us a positive forecast, calling for 7% appreciation across Alberta. Now, I am not ready to go and make that claim. In my 2021 Outlook video, I am calling for an even market for pricing in Calgary. But if the Canadian Real Estate Association is forecasting 7%, geez, that sure would be welcome here. Realtors would love it. Homeowners would love it. I don't think we're going to get that, but I also don't think that the cancellation of a pipeline is going to draw a forecast from 7% down to the negatives. I just don't see it for the same reason as sales. Not enough people will be affected by this particular change. Okay, so the economists at the Canadian Real Estate Association have a pretty healthy outlook for the Alberta real estate market heading into 2021. And it's so good that I think it outweighs a lot of the negative news associated with the Keystone pipeline being canceled. Now, if you take a look at this infographic here, you can see one of the data sets that the Canadian Real Estate Association's economists would have been looking at when they made their projections for this year. And one of the things that stands out to me here is the number of sales in the fourth quarter of 2020 relative to the same time period in 2019. You can see here we've just got a lot more activity in our marketplace, and that's one of the reasons why CREA would have been saying Alberta is going to see more sales activity in 2021 than we had in 2020. In addition to that, the months of supply metric is starting to tighten up as well. Months of supply is what's used to tell people if you've got a balanced market, a buyer's market, or a seller's market. A balanced market is deemed to be about 2.5 months worth of supply, and you can see here we're hovering right around 3, which means we're starting to progress from a buyer's market towards a balanced market, which is good news for Calgary real estate consumers. Okay, now when we're making inferences on pricing, what matters more than pipelines is population growth, more specifically the rate of population growth. And this is something that no doubt would have also been contemplated by the economists at the Canadian Real Estate Association. Now, you might have missed it because reports from Statistics Canada don't typically make the first page on the local news. Not in the same way that pipelines being rejected do, certainly not in Calgary anyway. But Statistics Canada just released its survey results from the 2019 to 2020 period. And you can see here that Calgary is looking pretty good when it comes to population growth. In fact, we are tied for the 4th fastest growing metropolitan center in all of Canada, surpassing Toronto, surpassing Vancouver, and surpassing Montreal. You might not have known about it, but this is really good news because it shows we're going to have more demand for our housing here in Calgary, which hopefully should mean more support for our current pricing, if not perhaps also seeing some price appreciation near the tail end of the year. Well, I hope a look at the bigger picture helps to take a little bit of the edge off of losing the Keystone XL pipeline expansion. It is regrettable that this project was canceled. I am a believer that as long as the world is going to be using oil and gas, that it should be using more Canadian oil and gas, because here in Canada, we produce energy to a very high ethical and environmental standard. But it didn't quite work out that way for us on this particular project. And Calgarians and Albertans are once again on the front lines of the environment, energy, and economy debate. But we're used to bad news, we're used to setbacks, and that isn't changing the outlook for Calgary and Alberta real estate. We've got population growth and a much more active market this year than in years past. So I hope you enjoyed the video today. I'd love to hear what you thought of it. Please go ahead and share a comment or a question. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you soon.